ישראל.
Prepare war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. Thus saith the Lord God, art thou he of whom I have spoken in old times by my servants the prophets of Israel?
Surrounding the nations preparing for Armageddon, as we've seen in those scriptures there in that video. Now, so many quotes you could use to sort of summarise where we're at and how we see things in the world. This is as good as any, isn't it? Jesus spoke to his disciples and he said, "Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and did not see it, and hear what you hear and did not hear it." And so in the times of Jesus, they were living in extraordinary times, seeing the fulfillment of those prophecies that spoke of the Lord Jesus Christ and his first coming. We live in the days where we are just about to see the Lord Jesus Christ come for his second coming. And so too we are seeing dramatic events. Now, how did the year start? Well, the year really started New Year's Eve, which was, for us, was 1st of January, but New Year's Eve in Great Britain, with a few hours to go at the end of last year, probably early morning for us on the 1st of January, the Queen signed the Brexit deal, which became law with just hours to spare. And that picture down the bottom of Boris Johnson there is one of him at a press conference on our Christmas morning a year ago, where it said that the Queen grants royal assent to Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. Because there was a deadline to that deal, you may remember that Brexit occurred on the 31st of January 2020, 31st of January, which gave them 11 months to, quite miraculously, no one saw this coming, but Boris Johnson had this idea that he would get a deal, or he actually had a deal, but he would get the trade deal later, after Brexit actually occurred, which was absolutely brilliant, but that there would be an end point. And that was the big problem with Brexit, was that they never seemed to have an end date, but once he got an end date, they got Brexit through, end of January 2020, gave him 11 months to get the trade deal, which he got, with a week to go because the deadline was coming quickly. Almost everything went in their favour, and it gave the lawyers 7 days to wrap up the final bits and pieces for the Queen to sign it just before this year came into effect. So on the 1st of January, this is what happened. We saw the Queen signing that 1st of January our time. And that's actually the headline that I remember waking up to on the 25th of December last year. That headline said that the Brexiteers almost lost everything. Now they have almost won everything. Now, there's a very big lesson in this, I believe, brothers and sisters. I'll mention that in a minute. The article says it's hard to underestimate how close this country came to throwing away the 2016 referendum result. It is from this context that we must view today. And he said that the deal with the EU achieved something that the people of this country instinctively knew was doable, but which they were told was impossible. Now, what that teaches us, I believe, is that despite all the odds, despite all the things seeming like they were going, everything going the other way, God in his own time will bring about his purpose. Now, the Brexit referendum looked like it was even on the morning, as our morning, but in the evening after the polls closed, it looked like Brexit was not going to be successful, 23rd of June 2016. And out of the blue, it was successful. Then the politicians tried everything they could to stop it. The media tried everything they could to stop it. The billionaires like George Soros fed huge amounts of money into the media and into protest groups and into politicians to try to stop it. And it looked like it was dead in the water. They almost lost everything. But now they've almost won everything. Now, the lesson of that, I believe, brothers and sisters, is that even when things do not seem to be working as we think they should, or there seems to be a hold-up or a delay, ultimately God's purpose will win out. There's a huge lesson in that. We know that Great Britain will be separate from Catholic Europe at the time of the end. These have one mind and will give their power and strength to the beast. Revelation 17 speaks of those nations there, the Catholic European nations in Rome. Now, they're pictured there on the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, in front of that picture called the Last Judgment a few years ago. That was actually in 2017. And Great Britain is not represented there. 3 days after that event, Great Britain handed over the document, I think it's called Article 50, which is the document that set in train the process for exiting the EU. But we know that Britain must be separate from Catholic Europe because for a number of reasons. Firstly, that Britain is separate at the Battle of Armageddon. When Russia invades the Middle East, Britain are responding in a way where they're saying, what are you doing? What are you coming to take a spoil? Catholic European nations, Magog and Gomer, will be with Russia. So that had to happen. Also, the fact that when the 10 nations make war with the Lamb, which Brother Mal mentioned this morning in Revelation 17, Britain's not involved with them because Britain is on Israel's side when that happens. And so this seemed like a real, in many ways, an impossibility. And many brethren spoke for years and years, decades before that occurred, and said it is going to happen. I know before I was born, before Britain even went into the EU in the, I think it was in the 1960s, and I've got a copy of it at home, one of the Shield magazines, my grandfather, who followed a lot of this, he wrote, he said that Britain cannot be a part of the 10 nations of Europe, cannot be a part. And he said that even if Britain does go into Europe, we don't think they will, but if they do, they will retire a short while later, poorer and a more sorry nation for it. And that brethren were able to write that before it even happened. They could see that if Britain went in, they would come out. And that's where we're at today. So Armageddon can take place. Russia could take the Middle East in the next few months or next year or whenever. Britain's out. They're exited, finished. So we know that Britain's future destiny is with Israel. Now, this is just amazing because it's not only stopped there at Brexit. This was only about a month or so ago, the Foreign Minister of Israel and the Foreign Minister of Britain signing this deal, this trade deal. It's a whole lot of deals, actually, preparing for more trade deals. There's a $5 billion deal already they've got. But this deal is to prevent Iran getting control over the Middle East. So that the signatures on the left there, this was actually done at Hanukkah. This, and I'll look at an article about this in a minute, but that document that was signed was a document. You can see them literally signing that document right there with the British and Israeli flags. That document signed says to Israel that Britain will protect Israel in the case of an invasion. That's what that document that they're signing a month ago says. That means that Britain can say, why do you come to take a spoil? Because they're there. That document cemented that. On Hanukkah, so Boris Johnson, of course, he's there with the menorahs, with the Israeli foreign minister. This is exactly what we expected, and it's come after Brexit. Now, scripturally, how do we... It's more than just Revelation 17, isn't it? Isaiah 60 verse 9 says, surely the isles shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first, Great Britain first, to bring thy sons from far, their silver and their gold with them, unto the name of Yahweh thy God, and to the Holy One of Israel, because he hath glorified thee. We know from 1 Kings 10 that the Queen of Sheba and the King of Tyre brought gifts acknowledging Yahweh's kingdom with Solomon reigning on the throne. And so too, there will be an acknowledgement from Great Britain. The daughter of Tyre will be there with a gift, Psalm 45. The daughter of Tyre is also Great Britain because this Tyre was destroyed. And Isaiah 23 tells us that Tarshish, that the trading power of Tyre goes across to Tarshish. Tarshish is the latter-day merchant power. So Psalm 72 matches that exactly by saying the kings of Tarshish and of the isles shall bring presents. The kings of Sheba and Seba, that's in the Arabian Peninsula, shall offer gifts. So just like the Queen of Sheba and the King of Tyre gave gifts and presents and assisted in the setting up of the temple in Solomon's kingdom, so too the daughter of Tyre, or Tarshish, will be there with the Arabians in the peninsula of Arabia to do the same for Jesus when he sets up the kingdom. And of course, Ezekiel 38, you've got the same powers, Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, and the young lions thereof. See that? The isles, or the coastlands, the isles, Tarshish, and the isles, merchants of Tarshish, and the young lions, the Commonwealth nations. Now, what I think is phenomenal about that is Psalm 45. Could someone tell me what Psalm 45 is about?
Wedding.
Yeah, the wedding between. Yeah, the king, who is? Well, most likely Solomon in the first instance. Who's it a type of?
Christ.
Jesus Christ, exactly. How do we know that that's the case? Are we just guessing that it's a type? Or is it quoted somewhere? Psalm 45, is that quoted anywhere? And to tell us that that's Jesus? It is. It's quoted in Hebrews. You can look that up. We know Psalm 45 is speaking about Jesus because Hebrews tells us that that is relating to Jesus. Now, if the daughter of Tyre, as Psalm 23 tells us that the power of Tyre passes over to Tarshish, and that the daughter of Tyre is there with a gift at the marriage of the Lamb, that's telling us, I believe, that Britain's not just at the Battle of Armageddon. They're not just helping Israel in the kingdom. There are representatives of the British government at the marriage of the Lamb when Jesus comes to marry his bride, which means saints must go from the resurrection to get those people. That's an incredible thought. And now Britain's separate from Europe. Now they've signed a deal with Israel to be there if Israel is invaded. It's all set. Now that is a picture of the Queen in March this year signing some document relating to the Commonwealth of Nations. And there's all the flags. The isles shall wait for thee. The coastlands. 54 Commonwealth nations of the world. Why do you think, does anyone know, why do you think God has set up 54 nations? Sometimes some come in and some come out a little bit. Why would there be Commonwealth nations? And what use is it? It's not just the fulfillment of prophecy. Why have Tarshish and young lions? Could it be that we have nations scattered throughout the world, outside of Europe, who assist in the preaching of the gospel to all nations when Christ comes? While the nations of Europe rage against Jesus Christ when he stands in Zion, these nations will allow the preaching of the truth. That's an incredible thought, isn't it? That we have coastlands spread throughout the world, probably including America as well. America is not part of the Commonwealth. That will allow the preaching of the truth through the world, to spread through the world, and will acknowledge the ships of Tarshish first. Surely the eyes will wait for me. And here's this UK defence deal with Israel in early December.
And it is for the sake of peace that the UK supports Israel's right to defend itself with no equivocation, including from hostile states like Iran. And along with our European and American friends, we will continue to do everything we can to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And as talks resume in Vienna, we hope that diplomacy can work. But while the nuclear issue is the most urgent, Iran's overall behavior has to change. The attacks at sea, the support for terrorism, the destabilization of the region all form part of the same pattern. Thank you for everything that you do. And
okay, so there we have support for Israel against the threat of Iran. And there it is in the Telegraph. Israel and UK and Israel join forces to stop Iran gaining nuclear weapons. And this is that signature between Foreign Minister Liz Truss and her Israeli counterpart, saying they're transforming our close relationship into an even closer relationship. The UK and Israel's foreign ministers have declared that they will work night and day to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon as they sign a historic 10-year plan for deepening ties. In a joint article for the Telegraph, Liz Truss and the Foreign Minister of Israel, they outlined this it's a wonderful article to read, a memorandum of understanding enabling the UK and Israel to work more closely on cybersecurity, technology development, defence, trade and science. It'll see Israel become one of the UK's most trusted allies in thwarting cyber attacks. Talks on a trade deal are also set to begin early in the next year. So it's all set in train, isn't it? And this happened at Hanukkah as a part of Hanukkah celebrations. And we know that Hanukkah is the festival of lights. It's called the Feast of Dedication in John chapter 10, where in Jerusalem, and it says, that's that quote there where it says it was winter and Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So Hanukkah, it's not mentioned by that name in the scripture, but it's called the Feast of Tabernacle, and it goes back to events in about 165 BC when the Jews overcame the Maccabees, who were the king of the north of their day. The Jews overcame the king of the north of their days, the Maccabees, and they reconsecrated the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Well, let's have a listen to what Boris Johnson says about this.
the very happiest of Hanukkahs to everyone who is lighting the menorah this week. And for the Jewish community, it's time to fry some latkes, spin some dreidels, and remember the triumph of Judah and his band of Maccabees, who didn't have the numbers in their favour, but who came out on top thanks to tactical nous and a rock-solid belief in the righteousness of their cause. A story best summarised, as is the case with so many Jewish festivals, as "They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat." And Hanukkah is a great opportunity to celebrate our fantastic Jewish community and all they bring to British life, and to reflect on what we all need to do to preserve that. Because the Seleucids weren't the first to try and erase Judaism, and they certainly and tragically weren't the last. But the Hanukkah story tells us that a little light can go a very long way. Strike a match in even the darkest room, and in an instant the inky blackness goes away, and as you light one candle and then another, the room gets brighter still. So this Hanukkah, let's all light a candle for our Jewish friends and family, neighbours and colleagues, and together let's drive away the darkness of anti-Semitism, not just for the next 8 days, but every day. Hag Sameach.
Okay, so there we see the relationship between Britain and Israel. Now, of course, we saw one thing that was quite a lot in the media this year was this French submarine deal that fell through with Australia, one of the young lions. And the French seemed to react very dramatically to the loss of that $90 billion deal. And they called it a stab in the back. And the French foreign minister said that the move to buy nuclear subs from the US in a new defence pact is a betrayal of trust. And this was in September, saying that France has expressed fury over Australia's surprise decision to scrap a huge submarine deal in favour of nuclear-powered subs from the US, describing it as a stab in the back. It really is, and we've established a relationship of trust with Australia. This trust has been betrayed, said the French foreign minister. They seem to react very dramatically as Australia, Great Britain, and the United States went their own way on the sub deals. Now, as a result of that, France started to look to other nations for military deals, and this is what then happened. France started announcing defence deals with numerous other European nations and also Eastern European nations. Now, we know that from prophecy that Greece is more of an Eastern European nation that will be pretty well a part of Russia at the time of the end.
French President Emmanuel Macron says European nations must make themselves respected in his first public comment since AUKUS was unveiled and the $90 billion submarine deal with France was torn up. He also insisted that Europe must stop being naive and show it has the power and the capacity to defend itself. It comes as France and Greece announced a joint defence deal worth $4.8 billion. Athens is going to purchase 3 French warships through the partnership to be built by Naval Group. That's the same company that had been contracted to build Australia's submarines. The vessels will be used by Greece as part of a strategy to boost its defence capabilities in the eastern parts of the Mediterranean.
Okay, so very interesting. Okay, so let's go back to the first week in January. Now, January this year started in quite a dramatic fashion. We're not going to talk about this because Brother Matt may deal with this a bit. He's talking about the spirit of the frogs in the book of Revelation. But it became very clear in the first week of the year that this was not going to be any normal year. And of course, that quite dramatic situation there of Trump supporters taking control of the Capitol building. There's so much that could be said about that in different ways and what was behind it or how on earth they were able to just walk in without any opposition whatsoever. This guy here who became sort of the face of it all. And this really began, I suppose, and as Brother Matt will speak to us on, is the rise of the sort of the lower class against the elite, against what they call the establishment. And this is showing us that the world we're living in is just not, it's not like years gone by. There's never been anything like this situation. And America is just a powder keg of conflict that is there that could go at any time if there's a major crisis because of the political situation in America. And I like this meme, I thought was quite good from the first week of the year. 2020 was a very strange year. Day 6 of 2021, that's the Speaker's chair in the Capitol building, guy there with horns and animal skin. In other words, this year was going to be like no other. And sure enough, it was. A meme often have in very few words tells the story. And so this year has seen the United States racking up debt at a greater rate than any nation has ever racked up debt in the history of the world. Now, there's actually a chart showing the debt since Joe Biden came in. He has just been signing off document after document. It's almost like every document that gets signed off every few months, another $2 trillion, another $2 trillion, that's 2,000 billion, every time, another 2 trillion, another 2 trillion. Now, that chart is taken from close to the middle of the year up to $27 trillion. If you go sort of at the beginning of that chart, the beginning of this chart starts in 94, where that line is where it says the global financial crisis, that's 2008, and it's just exponential. Now, it's the last few months, it's gone up to 30 trillion, he's had another bill in the Parliament to actually get another $2 trillion signed off, and one Democrat actually backed away from it. One Democrat and the whole thing has been stopped because he said we can't keep printing money and borrowing the printed money. It's sending inflation through the roof. So one of the Democrats has held up the last $2 trillion deal. Now, whether that'll eventually go through again, but every few months it's another $2 trillion, another $2 trillion, and inflation's going through the roof. Now, if you have inflation go through the roof, what happens is interest rates go through the roof. Now, if you borrowed $1 million or $2 million, I think in Sydney, the average house price in Sydney is 1.3 million. And interest rates go through the roof. It's like, you see where things could go. Biggest inflation threat in 40 years, looms over markets. Janet Yellen says that the US could default on its national debt. Powell, she used to be the head of the National Reserve. Yellen and Powell warn of a devastating impact of US debt default. The United States, if it was a company, would have been declared bankrupt long ago. Here's a few headlines from November and early December. A crash is becoming certain. That's in an investment magazine on November the 1st, which says complacency leads to denial. Now, I read that article. The thing that was really bizarre about that article is the guy was still hoping to make money before the market crashed. So he's like, he writes this article saying a crash is certain, but I still reckon there's money to be made in a short while, and I'm hoping to pull it all out before it crashes. But of course, we know that what happens, investors always want that little bit more, and then they're like, it's all gone. In the Australian, Terry McCrann says that US inflation has reached boiling point. That's a few months ago too. Global bubble burst, Evergrande set for collapse, causing a great reset worse than 2008. This was at the end of November, and Evergrande has been trying to stay afloat throughout the last month. Faces a $221 billion pound debt. That's about $300 or $400 billion. An expert says that it's claimed the company's collapse could spark the fall of the financial system. The collapse of Evergrande is the first domino in the eventual destruction of the world financial system. Due to the size of the property market, estimated at $55 trillion, he claimed the collapse of China's property market will be a worse financial meltdown than what was seen in 2008. This is a very interesting little summary of what's going on with Evergrande and the fragile state of the world's financial system.
Why are these people so angry? Why is China's biggest real estate player under attack? And why should you care about it? Well, here is why. In 2019, China remained silent about a disease outbreak. You would remember that. It gave the world the Wuhan virus pandemic. What you saw just now could be the beginning of a financial pandemic. China could export a global financial crisis, and these images from Evergrande offices could just be the beginning. I'll tell you why I say this. Evergrande is China's biggest real estate developer. It is now staring at bankruptcy. It owes, listen to this carefully, this company owes more than $300 billion. That is the level of debt, $300 billion. That's how much Evergrande must pay its creditors. But it doesn't have the money. The company has admitted that it faces a debt crisis, and this led to massive protests. Chinese citizens who bought homes in Evergrande projects now want their money back. They believe their hard-earned savings could be going down the drain. Tonight, I would like to begin with a video. This is China's Kunming city. The pictures are from August this year. On your screen are 15 high-rise buildings. All of them are unfinished apartments. For 8 years, these 15 buildings have just stood here. The developer ran out of money, so the apartments were never really completed. Chinese authorities finally woke up last month. They planted 85,000 bombs, 85,000 bombs, and decided to blow up everything. Onlookers were heard screaming when that happened. These dramatic pictures will now become a common sight in China. More unfinished buildings will be blown up by authorities. Imagine what this does to people who put their life savings in these apartments. Why are Chinese authorities doing this? Because China's property bubble is starting to burst. And why should you worry about this? Because the whole world is going to feel the shockwaves. Almost 2 years back, remember, China exported a pandemic and covered up its mistakes. The world felt the impact. It's still feeling the impact. Now, a financial crisis is brewing in China, and the Communist Party is trying to cover that up too.
Right, so you can see where that will go. Now, so the world is very fragile, on a very fragile edge. Now, big news of the year, really, one of the biggest news stories was the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. Quite a lot of that was talked about in the media, so we'll only mention this briefly. And that's one of the quite extraordinary photos there of the Parliament building in Kabul, where just this ragtag team of terrorists from the desert just came in and just walked in and just took over. The Americans just walked out in the space of a day or two. It just lost the whole lot. And there's some of the headlines that really explain what went on, how the Taliban weakened America. And what is really incredible was the amount of armaments that were left behind by the Americans in Afghanistan. And all that US weaponry is now in the hands of the Taliban. You know how much money, and you know how much worth of weapons ended up in the hands of the Taliban? Yeah, that's it, £62 billion. So it's about $85 billion, that's $85,000 million worth of armaments left behind by the Americans into the hands of the Taliban. And there's a description of how many of them. 600,000 small arms and assault weapons, 16,000 night vision goggles, 200 plus aeroplanes and helicopters, 75,000 vehicles, including Humvees and light tactical vehicles, 75,000 vehicles just left behind. They walked away and left it all. Now that is it's just completely mind-boggling. Now, given those scriptures we've considered and looked at it, those ones in the video at the beginning, Daniel chapter 11, can you see the events of Armageddon occurring with America just walking away or unable to do anything and just saying, why are you coming to take us spoil? What do you think Russia and China are thinking about this? Why are you coming to start? Oh, why are you doing that? No resistance at all, just walked away.
Courtesy of Uncle Sam, American supplied armour, now riding under Taliban colours. The spoils of victory being paraded by the new masters of Kandahar. An extraordinary sight in the city where their movement began and where they could now bask in triumph. Their ragtag desert army now mechanised, even with the odd helicopter. Propaganda gold for jihadists the world over. But they're not just playing with new toys. In Kabul, there are reports the Taliban is securing its grip, carrying out atrocities. We spoke to one Afghan in hiding because he'd worked as a translator. Anonymously, he relayed reports of Taliban squads moving through the city, hunting down anyone who worked with their enemies.
They just killed 10 people in one street. They killed people anonymously and they just killed them during the night.
Okay, so just a crazy situation there. And Britain is worried about what's going on in the Middle East. So the British Army have got various bases in different parts of the world. And here's just one headline that shows how where the British are in other parts of the world, they're now bringing them into the Middle East. They're going to move troops out of Canada. They don't need them in Canada, but where are they going to put them? They're going to put them here in the Arabian Peninsula because they're concerned about the rise of Iran here. They're concerned about the war in Yemen, which is really between Iran and Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and they're moving their weaponry into the Arabian Peninsula because they can see the build-up of military pressure that's coming into the Middle East. And of course, there's been the Abraham Accords. Now that was carried out by Donald Trump. He signed those Abraham Accords, and the Democrats, despite there being numerous Democrats in the government in America who are anti-Israel, there are still some quite pro-Israel Democrats, the old school, that are there in the government, and they are continuing to continuing with that policy of pro-Israel, at least for the time being. John Kerry there, the former US Secretary of State, currently serving as President Joe Biden's special climate envoy, finally got to help to hammer out and watch the signing of the Middle East agreement on Monday. It wasn't an Israeli-Palestinian accord, one that former Defence Minister Moshe Ya'alon said that Kerry was excessive and messianic about brokering. Rather, it was the signing in Dubai of a tripartite energy water accord between Israel, the United Arabs, that's the UAE, and Jordan. So here we've got Israel forming very close financial agreements with the Arab nations. And of course, they all see it as being very worthwhile because there's a lot of money to be made as a part of those deals. But Iran is a problem. And in Iran, the threat of Iran is what is really drawing those Arabian countries closer and closer to Israel. They know that they must link very tightly with Israel because Iran is presenting a major threat. And Israel, in the last 5 or 6 weeks, has been preparing, or at least to be in a position, but it appears to be preparing to attack Iran's nuclear program. Have a look at this.
Let's turn to West Asia now. Two old foes talking about war, Israel and Iran. It all started with a report last week. Israel is apparently setting aside funds for attacking Iran. How much money are we talking about? Around $1.5 billion. Israel plans to spend this money, $1.5 billion, on new weapons, modern jets, intelligence gathering drones and other artillery. The rumor is they also want a very specific American weapon. The GBU-72 Advanced 5K penetrator. It's also called the bunker buster. This weapon could be used to penetrate Iran's nuclear sites. Israel wants to buy it from the US. Will Joe Biden sell? The US has sold smaller bunker busters to Israel in the past. Plus, there is bipartisan support for arming Israel. The next question is, will Israel attack? How serious are they about starting a war? According to some reports, the Israeli Air Force is already training pilots. Their pilots are running simulations, basically reenacting how they would hit Iranian targets. Is there any scope left for diplomacy? Well, there always is, but the window is closing fast.
Okay, so there we got Britain and Israel and the Arabs coming closer together. Again, a seemingly impossible situation, but sure enough, that's what's starting to happen through the threat of Iran. Now, Saudi Arabia is very much almost in a cold war with Iran. And to the south of Saudi Arabia is that little country of Yemen, where Iranian-backed terrorists are actually there fighting a proxy war with Saudi Arabia. Have a look at this.
The Saudi-led coalition is launching airstrikes on legitimate military targets in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. It has warned civilians not to gather around or approach the targeted areas. And according to a UN agency estimate, Yemen's 7-year-long war will have claimed 377,000 lives by the end of the year. Meanwhile, the number of displaced people in camps in Yemen's Marib province has risen nearly tenfold since September. The coalition targeted new sites for drone activity. The Houthis have repeatedly launched cross-border attacks on Saudi Arabia since the coalition intervened in Yemen in March 2015. After the movement ousted the Saudi-backed government from the capital. A report by the UN Development Programme report says that by the end of the year, the fighting will have directly killed over 150,000 people, and nearly 60% of deaths will have been caused by indirect impacts such as lack of safe water, hunger and disease.
Okay, so you virtually hear none of that in our media at all. And here's Yemen here. Yemen is this country here, and you can see that the Iranians are in there funding rebels against Saudi Arabia and against the government there in Yemen. So you've got this threat of Iran coming down into this area, and that's why Saudi Arabia is fighting. It's a war against Iranian-backed militias down there. You can see that this is very much solidifying this north-south situation that we would expect as of Daniel 11, which we read tonight. We know that Russia will be dominant in the northern part there with the Shiite area of the Islamic world, Iran, Iraq, Syria. Whereas to the south, you'll have that Britain and Arabian backed forces there who will be unable to stem the invasion. Now, Russia is already getting into Egypt, so it won't be very long until we see really that Egypt will be taken by Russia. And there's the old king of the north. There was Ptolemy, which was one of the generals of Alexandria in the south here. Generally, the darker areas representing the Shiite territories, Shiite Muslim territories backed by Russia. This guy here is Seleucid. That's the one Boris Johnson was talking about, the Seleucids that were there in the time about 160s before Christ. But at the time of the end, we will have another king of the north, king of the south type scenario. Now, what we're going to look at really for the rest of our talk now, to finish up with, is the increased Russian strategic moves and military build-up in the Middle East, because this is really what's very dramatic at this point in time. Now, not only are we expecting a king of the north and king of the south, but we expect that Russia will become dominant in this territory, because Daniel 7 says that the fourth beast, the Roman Empire, and Russia will be the Roman Empire as far as the east is concerned, will tread the residue. Now, the residue is that area that the Roman Empire previously did not take. So, and it matches with Daniel 2, that matches with Ezekiel 38, because you've got Persia involved in Ezekiel 38. And of course, the ISIS crisis in September 2015 has really brought Russia into that area there of Syria and Iraq. And in Iran, Russia have been using the airstrips there in Iran for the last few years. So we're seeing the scenario coming about where Russia will take control of that territory. Now, Putin, at the beginning of the year, warned that the world risked spiralling into an all-in-all conflict. He said that the pandemic and the widening economic inequality has created parallels to the 1930s, and said that a failure to deal with those tensions helped spark World War II. Of course, he says he always likes to play the peacemaker. He says nowadays such a heated conflict's not possible. I hope it's not possible in principle, because it would mean the end of civilization. So Putin sort of, you know, he's always tries to play the good guy. And of course, Russia is involved everywhere. Wherever you look, they're involved. Now, not just in nations, but they're also in space.
He's talking about weaponization of space, something that all countries principally oppose, but do not necessarily ensure. This test is a reminder of what the world faces, what future wars could look like. You see, we obsess with boundaries on land, securing them, while countries can be brought to a standstill by striking satellites in space. That's a frontier we need to guard. You see, satellite technology is baked into everything we need today. Much of modern day life depends on satellites. Today, Russia destroyed its own satellite. What happens if a country targets another country's satellite? Think of the possible scenarios. With one such strike, you can cripple critical systems. You can disrupt phone connections, shut down GPS systems, stop airlines from operating, block electronic payments, make your debit and credit cards useless, bring cable and internet networks to a halt. Basically, when you target a satellite, you can hit life and livelihoods of a whole country.
Interesting that Russia did that about a month ago. They knocked out one of their old satellites, and a lot of people are thinking that it's like a plan to actually knock out other satellites very shortly before they invade other countries. Now, a more obscure article to do with Russia was back in April, and this has been coming for a number of years, is that there are large amounts of gold underneath the Sinai Peninsula, which is, of course, a part of Egypt. And here we have seen mining countries have now been awarded blocks in Egypt's eastern desert to explore for gold and to unlock vast untapped mineral resources. And a year after launching its first bid under the new rules, it has so far clinched 5 gold exploration contracts in first bidding round and kept the tendering system rolling as it tries to build momentum. Now, why would, maybe one of the young people might be able to tell us, why would we be interested to see gold in the ground now being able to be mined in Egypt? And I'll give you a hint, it's in our reading tonight at Daniel 11, verse 40 to the end. Is there anything in there that would tell us that Egypt will have something that Russia will want to get their hands on?
Verse 43.
Yes. Verse 43, he will have power over the treasures of gold and of silver and the precious things of Egypt. Now, historically, you think, what on earth is that? But Russia wants to get its hands on gold because it knows that in a financial crisis, you want to have gold. And Russia has been, in recent years, building up huge reserves of gold, in fact, more than the entire rest of the world combined. So Russia is very much involved in Egypt, and it won't be long until Egypt just falls into Russia's hands and they'll get control of the gold of Egypt. But of course, China, which is not really a direct aspect of Bible prophecy, but China is helping Russia become more powerful. They're conducting massive military exercises with Russia. There's been, that's the end of November, the end of October, joint naval patrols by China and Russia in the West Pacific. There's a huge move now, a huge change in the dynamics of naval power in the world in favour of Russia and China. And this is what we've been wondering for quite a long time, was summarised. Quite surprised that it was summarised in, of all places, the Sydney Morning Herald, but it's been saying exactly what we've been thinking for a long time, that the US can't win two wars at once. It's Biden's worst nightmare. Recent developments raise troubling questions about whether they might be interested in coordinating their plans for territorial conquest. The Chinese panda's been prowling ever closer to its favoured morsel, Taiwan, as the Russian bear stretches its claws in the direction of its Ukraine. We're now hearing increasingly urgent warnings that each is considering aggressive action as early as next year to seize their respective targets. This is 7th of December, a few weeks ago. If either Russia or China should make a lunge to take the territory it craves, it would be a major disaster. If both acted around the same time, it would be much worse. What has not yet been fully appreciated is that the possibility of both happening simultaneously in a more or less coordinated fashion. Taken together, these two acts of conquest would fundamentally shift the global balance of power, sounding the death knell for diplomatic and security arrangements that have underpinned global peace for decades. I think that sums up what so many of us have been saying for a while. If these two, Russia and China, work together, they go at once, what's America going to do? No hope at all. Of course, China's been involved in the Middle East too. And China, while China's not necessarily a part of the Confederacy, I think it has other plans. This is giving Russia the power it needs. And we see that China's been involved with assisting Russia's power grab in Syria, just to the north of Israel. And here's a warning. We saw this in the conscientious objection last night, but here is a warning a couple of months ago about the threat China poses to Australia.
The message coming out of China is getting louder by the day. It doesn't like other countries, especially Australia, ganging up and meddling in its affairs. As we know, Beijing is currently doing its best to punish us economically, but in the last few days, President Xi Jinping has also ratcheted up the rhetoric by warning of the perils of a new Cold War. A loose translation is, if we don't stop poking the panda, we'll face serious consequences. Now, it's worth taking that threat seriously because Xi controls the largest military force in the world, and as one of his supporters cautions tonight, the cost of conflict with China could be Armageddon. It's a prospect as terrifying as it is unthinkable. A military showdown between two nuclear-armed superpowers, the United States and China. A conflict that could reshape the world order. Is Australia vulnerable at the moment?
Australia is monstrously vulnerable at the moment. We have this naive faith that American military power is infinite, and it's not.
Tonight, leading minds on the looming war with China.
It's going to be waged on an economic front. It's going to be waged on a social affairs front. They're going to come at us all ways.
How likely is it? How prepared are we? And at what cost for us and the world?
Use all your imagination. Think about all the nightmares you can think of. And what will happen will be 10 times more than your worst nightmare. You are talking about the possibility of Armageddon.
Taipei is a modern metropolis, capital of Taiwan, an island half the size of Tasmania, yet home to a population just about the same as all of Australia. The trigger point for conflict with China, if it comes, is right here. Why do you think people in Australia should care about what's happening in Taiwan right now?
Because we are a democracy, and democracy do not survive in isolation.
In time to come. Of course, Russia is been in Syria since 2015, but it's also expanding its influence in Lebanon. There's a headline from June: fulfilling an Middle Eastern dream, Russia's interests in Lebanon. And Russia does not board the Mediterranean Sea, but has a naval military base in Tarshish in Syria. It's exerting its influence around nearby countries, including Lebanon. Now, that's directly north of Israel. Russia perceives Lebanon as part of the Syrian track, so Moscow will strive to continue playing in this field to capitalise on the influence after intervening in the Syrian conflict. One of Russia's main goals is to expand its influence in the region and control the energy resources in the eastern Mediterranean. Russia's been playing an active role in Lebanon and views it as an extension of its regional policy towards Syria. At a time when minorities have suffered throughout the Middle East, leaders of some Christian communities in Lebanon, having felt the abandonment of the West, regard Russia as a potential protector. Now, that's important because Ezekiel 38 describes Russia in the Middle East as a guard unto them, and that is the Christian communities, the countries in the Middle East. And there's these headlines similar: the Russian bear in Lebanon. And the Americans are losing their grip on Lebanon. Now, you might think, well, what about Turkey? Where does Turkey fit into this? How could Turkey fall into the hands of Russia? Is Turkey going to be any match for Russia? Well, have a look at what's going on in Turkey at the moment.
In just about a decade, the lira has lost 75% of its value against the dollar. Out of this, a bulk of the loss happened this year, 45% of the fall, and 15% on Tuesday alone. This is unheard of, and it is hurting the people of Turkey. The crash in the currency has made prices shoot up. Turkey's inflation has risen to 20%, 20. That's the highest it has ever been in the last 2 decades, 20% inflation. Why is this a big deal? Because there was a time when Turkey was the fastest growing economy in the G20. It was tipped to be the next big thing after India and China. In 2017, the country's GDP had surged by 5%. It outperformed all major economies. It stood at a massive $863 billion. Today, it has sunk to $740 billion. What happened to Turkey? President Erdogan. That's what happened to Turkey. The ambitions of one man are hurting the interests of the whole country. Last year, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan embarked on an economic experiment, an experiment that economists have called reckless. What did he do?
So that Turkey is really on the verge of financial collapse, and you could see that it will just fall into the hands of Russia. There's just a handful of headlines from December that shows that Russia's preparing an invasion of Ukraine. I really wonder whether it's not so much just Ukraine, but they'll take Turkey and other countries as well. And today, just in the news today, I saw a headline saying that they're preparing civilians now, they're training civilians in the Ukraine to actually resist a Russian invasion, which is expected very soon. And this is what we're seeing now.
To Russia now, is it preparing to invade Ukraine? That question is getting bigger by the day, as is the number of Russian troops near the Ukrainian border. An estimated 100,000 troops have been stationed here. 100,000 Russian troops at the border. There's no obvious reason for this build-up, no upcoming military exercise, no seasonal troop rotation. So what is Moscow up to? The US says this build-up is for a large-scale push into Ukraine, an invasion from multiple locations. This is what American intel suggests. It says Putin is considering an invasion next year with a total of 100 battalion tactical groups that could cross into Ukraine from Crimea, Russia and Belarus. What's a battalion tactical group? It's a temporary military formation made up of several battalions, along with attached artillery, air defense, engineering and logistical support units. The US says these groups are planning to enter Ukraine, occupy an extensive territory and stay there for several months, even years.
Okay, so I think, and you'll see that with Turkey really on the brink, and there's a number of other countries in the region very much on the brink. I think what's going to happen is the UK is going to try to resist this, and they won't be able to do it. And there's been claims by intelligence agencies, former British spy Christadelphian has warned that Russian leaders believe they are at war with the UK. He said that Britain is failing to deter the threat. Now that's exactly what we would expect at Armageddon. Britain are not going to be able to stem the tide. Britain will be there to try to help Israel, but they're not going to be able to stop it. And that's what's happening at the moment. And so where is this all going to lead? It's going to lead to the kingdom of God on earth. And what a wonderful thing that we can be encouraged by, to see incredible comfort that we can get by seeing the prophecies just fitting into place absolutely perfectly. That as sure as these prophecies have come to pass to get us to this point, so too the kingdom of God will be set up. And even though it seems to be taking longer than we want, it will come to pass just as these other prophecies have come to pass.